afternoon, everyone. It's, yeah, I know, it is that time of the day, and when you are doing a session just before lunch, you know that you are standing between lunch, and I'm going to make this as painless as I can. So glad to be here. Looks like a gorgeous Delhi winter morning, and absolutely energized and glad to be here today. I was thinking about what are the things that I should cover in my short talk. And I want to break this down into three parts. But let me start by letting you know that I don't have PowerPoint slides. So that means you'll have to keep looking at me, which is not an attractive proposition, but much better than looking at graphs and charts and all kinds of other additional insights and gyan. I want to break this into three simple parts. I want to talk about semiconductors. Give me a show of hands. How familiar is this crowd, audience? How familiar are you with semiconductors in general? Some familiarity? Okay, that's much better than what I thought. So thank you so much. So I'll try to keep it at a level where it's useful. I want to talk about innovation and tech commercialization in semiconductors. That's one part. I also want to give you a couple of quick stories from my 2 decades of career in semiconductors, both in US and in India. And hopefully every story has some kind of a takeaway. My stories will have a little bit of a semiconductor deep tech bias, but I'm sure they translate very well to smaller startups or other technology companies. And lastly, I want to just leave you with some simple frameworks as to how do you want to think about innovation and incubating tech and monetizing it successfully in whatever venture you are in. So semiconductor is a tricky industry. I've had the privilege and the honor of being in this for almost 23 years of my life. I love pizzas. I use the pizza metaphor of it is like the base of the pizza. The innovation keeps happening on toppings. You can keep slicing and dicing different toppings, but the base of almost everything you talk about, be that be machine learning, AI, data science, if the chip companies stop doing what they're doing, we will not have a lot of what we're talking about, right? Every platform you think of is largely fueled by the processor, memory, and the networking chips that we collectively build in this industry, which is almost worth $500 billion. So clearly, been an interesting ride for me personally. Also, a couple of things on the industry that have a strong tie to innovation. This industry is largely been guided by what is very well known as Moore's Law. So again, I'm not testing this audience, but just to keep you all awake. Moore's Law, give me a raise of hands so that you all have at least heard of it. Yeah, okay, of course. Why it is important is, unlike many other sectors, Moore's Law gives you some kind of a long-term marker as to how innovation and commercialization needs to happen. What the law typically states is the number of transistors on a simple silicon die will keep multiplying at a certain time phase. Of course, it's a little bit of a broad marker, but what it has actually done to the industry is give all of us a little bit of a sense of time frame as to how we innovate. And the approach to what we build, be that be the processor guys like Intel, a memory guy like Micron, or the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and other GPS and other key networking wireless technologies, the approach can change. And how we do it and what we bring in terms of innovation can change, but the markers are roughly the same. So clearly, the Moore's Law is clearly been a little bit of and I'll talk a little more about it towards the end of my short talk, but that's been a marker for all of us. And sometimes it's important in tech commercialization, innovation to have a marker, because that gives you a little bit of benchmarking with your peers, industry, and your customers. The second interesting insight for semiconductors, and it's a very cyclical, volatile sector. I was just telling one of our colleagues today, earlier today, we've gone from a period of excess supply to shortage to excess supply in less than 12 months. And this happens because of what is very beautifully called in the FMCG sector as a bullwhip effect, right? And our management professor would know about it. And what it basically does is we get some kind of an indicator at a retail level that some chips, be that being mobile or automotive or any sector, are seeing a little bit of surge at a retail level. The retail then goes and changes its forecast at the distribution level. That happens, and then the forecast gets further amplified at a global manufacturing level. The manufacturer then goes and gives the signals to its suppliers. So in a very short period of time, you have a very likely opportunity of a translation of what was a largely territorial specific trigger morphing into a very large supply chain challenge at a manufacturing level. I have seen this happen for almost 30 years with predictability, and it makes innovation even more tougher because what we are seeing right now today at all the big, be that be NVIDIA, Intel, Micron, we have moved from what was a shortage during COVID because of surge in PCs and other devices to what has become a classic inventory glut. So how do you innovate when you have supply chain challenges and inventory sitting in various parts of the value chain? Makes this sector even more intriguing and also attractive, and you get some deep insights out of it. Let me morph into 4 stories that I have in very quickly to give you some takeaways of how I have personally with my team members looked at innovation and tech commercialization. The first one goes back to almost many decades back, so you can do your math on how old I am. I recall sitting in Austin. I was running a P&L for a large semiconductor company out of US, and one of my product guys comes and gives me that, hey, listen, boss, we have this opportunity, a company called Amazon, and they're building an e-book. And this is 2006 timeframe. The Kindle had not come. And what they're planning to do is essentially have a display that looks like paper, the normal regular paper, because you don't have the backlight issues of LCD. It's much more easier on the eyes, and it looks almost like a book. Remember, it looks very intuitive and very normal to have these discussions today, but 17, 18 years back, by not having a very strong position from our leadership team, I, in my infinite wisdom, and they were asking us to actually collaborate on a deeper silicon level, because just to keep it simple, this whole e-book, e-ink was essentially an IP that was sitting next to our silicon controller. The request from Amazon was, hey, can you actually put it on top of your SoC, your chip, so there's more integration and better performance. This is more effort, more engineering time for me. At the same time, I'm evaluating 2 opportunities, one from Microsoft, which was preparing an iPod killer called the Microsoft Zune. Does the Zune player mean anything for anyone? Probably a relatively young audience, but, and then we had Sony, which had a great Walkman device and was trying to create an MP3 player. So as an owner of a P&L, I have to have the tough call to choose between what looked like an extremely disruptive, very unique value proposition from a largely internet company. Amazon doesn't have, at that point of time, the gravitas of a device player. It was known as early days of AWS. They had just become a monster e-commerce company, but no track record in building devices. So as I said, in my wisdom, I said, listen, we can't collaborate strategically. So what happens next is something I keep reflecting in all my keynotes. They obviously go and change the chip that they're working with. They go and work with one of my competition that was smart enough to have the line of sight. And the reason I mention that is this is a classic example of sometimes, as a strategic supplier, the first mover disadvantage. You just don't know, you're blinded. You're blinded in terms of the bets that you're going to take. And you tend to naturally take bets with people you work with. Microsoft and Sony were my natural customer base. And there is what I call the classic concept of exploit. When you're a strategic chip vendor, you put too much emphasis on exploit. And exploit largely means I want to keep working with people I know, that I build products with, and my share of business, my share of wallet with these guys needs to keep on growing. While the exploit is largely a strategic betting, and it's on the back of the culture of the company, of course, but it also comes on the back of having a leadership team that can actually challenge the leader in the room on some of these bets. At that point of time, the learning I had was I didn't have that kind of leadership team that would kind of go and say, sir, this has to be challenged. It looks so exciting. Let's go and take a bet. So if you're a startup or a large company, just make sure that when you do your strategic evaluation of proposals that come from both startups as well as from inside your venture activities, you have the foresight to ensure that a small portfolio of bets within the P&L constraints are being looked into. That was the first story, and that's the takeaway. The second one happened a few years down the line. There's a company called Mobileye. I would not be surprised if you have not heard of it. Mobileye, anyone has anyone heard of it? You have? Okay, wonderful. So Mobileye, very simply put, is an Israeli company that was doing a lot of work in lane departure, autonomous safety. This is almost, again, 17, 18 years back. And they had approached us, and I was leading this a big part of the chip company, and they had approached us for a joint venture to create platform solutions for the automotive market and in the infotainment telematics space. And their intent, our intent, and this is true for many large companies, our intent is we see something exciting, we saw a lot of merit, we want to acquire that company. And the startup company obviously doesn't want to get acquired because they have their own sense of worth and valuation. They were more keen to actually do a joint strategic collaboration. My management and I had no patience for anything that is on the lines of, it's an acquisition. Come on, you're too small, get acquired. And we were, I can say this now because this is all in public domain for most part. They had actually proposed $200 million. We were kind of close to paying that. The postscript is, 8 years down the line, Intel acquires the company for $15 billion. And 3 weeks pass, they do a successful IPO. And when I reflect on what we could have done better, the biggest takeaway is this very usual, not invented here kind of an approach to doing business, right? My engineering team fed me with the confidence we don't really have to go and either we acquire them or we can go and build our own little solution that cohabits the system on chip that we were building for automotive markets. So the takeaway is, many of you in big and small companies will often encounter this need to do a lot of things in-house. Of course, there is always a Cisco-like company that has a very beautiful, neat way of acquiring companies and making them successful. But most large companies consistently struggle with acquisitions. And very often it is more useful to have a joint development kind of a collaboration where each party tests each other out over a period of time, and then you make either a strategic acquisition or you decide to walk away. So the takeaway for me is when you see something disruptive or useful for you, make sure that you don't just go with an acquisition only or a not invented here kind of an approach. By now you must be wondering that I've been only be part of failures. I've had a few success stories too. Let me give you a couple of quick success stories. While GPS, Bluetooth, and Wi-Fi are so ordinary today as technology, many years back, I started my career as a GPS designer. I used to design GPS chipsets, front end, and then digital. And what we did in my company at that point of time, which has been a big takeaway for me all through my life and career, most of our peers were evaluating these technologies at a piecemeal basis. I'm looking at GPS as one specific combination of digital and front end, Wi-Fi, digital front end. I'm simplifying things for you here. We took essentially a platform approach. What we said was, these technologies, though, are made to specific standards. If we use it as a broad platform, we can actually make the most of it across our entire portfolio. Because GPS can find application in mobile, in automotive, in mining, you name it, right? The application base is very spread out. And we took the right call of actually taking a very platform approach to integrating technologies, acquiring them, and then integrating them with our product flows. And even today, when I hear about AI and data science, one concern I often have is in large companies in general, people tend to evaluate this on a per piecemeal basis, right? It's like data science for design, AI for manufacturing. At Micron, we are trying very hard to make sure the broad platform for AI and machine learning is broad. And then for specific verticals, be that in design or manufacturing or assembly test, we have unique specific pillars driving it. So whenever you have a chance to take a platform approach on technologies, please go and embrace it with all your heart and mind. And the most recent one, which is a little more of a operational business model innovation. E-commerce today is commonplace, but 11, 12 years back, I was at Intel then, we took the very strategic call of embracing and betting on the success of e-commerce. Flipkart was in its early days of evolution. I remember sitting down with Benny, and they were a small entity, and we took the very important call of actually moving a lot of our offline retail business to e-commerce. Because we realized at some point of time, for a country like India, e-commerce had been very successful in the US, but in India, it was still a largely brick and mortar model. And to be able to move your business from what was essentially a better margin, limited reach, but better margin structure to something which is completely low to very low margins. But we figured out that the penetration that e-commerce will provide a few years down the line will make up for some of the margin losses. So that has been my mantra in some ways, working with my team members. The success story there is if you have the ability to quickly tweak your operating and business models to newer ways of getting to market, Of course, it looks obvious, but it was very painful then, and I had a lot of naysayers saying, why would you even do that? They are just too small, and how are they going to even scale? But what we did then was, again, privilege of a large company at that point of time, we did a very 360-degree relationship with Flipkart. We were as Intel, we built the data center. We were the backbone for the data center. We built it together. We also ensured that we are an active player in their marketplace model. We're selling a lot of laptops and devices in the marketplace. We had unique investments in IoT and other parts of supply chain where Intel could help. So by combining these elements of 360 engagement, we gave them the belief and faith that a big company is actually partnering with them. And the net was, we got the benefit of that scale that they achieved 5-6 years down the line. And today, if you look at most large OEM, be that be a mobile phone or a laptop player, e-commerce is more than 60-70% of their footprint today. So those are some short stories of my journey through many of these innovation and commercialization challenges. I want to quickly leave you with some quick elements, because the most often question that I often get asked is, how do I nurture innovation independent of the size of the company, right? I wish there was a recipe. There is none, right? And in the absence of a recipe, what I would leave you with are some elements you want to use to kind of cross-check, audit, health check on the organization or the strategy that you're part of. The first one is most companies benefit from what I call a deep aspiration. Aspiration is important. This is President Kennedy saying in the early 60s that he wants to have a man on the moon. And then the entire ecosystem in US comes together, from NASA to Pentagon, and to make that realization happen. At a more corporate level, we have CEOs who give you targets, be that be an operating margin target or an innovation target or be a product market share, market gain target. By itself, it doesn't mean much, but in the Moore's Law is a great example of aspiration. As I mentioned in my earlier comments, it gives you direction. Now, come what may, Micron or Intel or NVIDIA, we are going to make sure that we have a plan to scale down the nodes that we operate in, and that will happen in almost clockwork. Even though the laws of physics are really, really demanding, it's becoming more and more difficult to scale chips down. So the aspiration part of innovation is obviously critical. I would recommend that we ensure that we actually have the aspiration translate down to bits and pieces that every employee of the company can understand. Very often the CEO would go and say something on the Wall Street or to the investors, and the average employee has no idea as to how to connect the dots. You want to become the #1 player in a domain. What is it? How do I contribute, and how do I make sure that I am actually part of that journey? So having an aspiration, breaking it down into parts that most employees can digest is helpful. The second part, no shortage of ideas, especially in our country where we have so many smart jugaad minds. I will tell you, every Friday we have an event where at Micron we have employees come and give ideas. Dime a dozen, no shortage of ideas, right? Which is a good way. It's part of the funnel that we all seek. The challenge we often have is, do we have enough criteria, especially in large companies, to filter those ideas? In fact, while there is a common perception that big companies sometimes don't have the innovation DNA, I don't think so. Where we struggle is the execution of that idea. Almost every startup that has displaced a large player, it's not because of not having the idea or the concept. It's not being able to translate this with agility, which startups tend to do much better than bureaucratic large organizations. So make sure you have the right choosing mechanism. At Micron, we obviously have a ventures arm, which kind of looks at leading edge technologies, and there is a different motion towards acquiring them or partnering with them. At a more country level, what I do and what my teams do are making sure that we have some criteria built around what gets accepted. And being in the silicon business, an idea takes almost 18 months to actually show up on a piece of silicon. So the lead time is so long. The principles we used are what we called a shift-left mechanism, whereby that improvement, it could be a process improvement, performance improvement. I want to make sure that we have some way of simulating that in software much before the hardware actually shows. So having the right metrics to choose the right idea is going to be obviously critical. The third one is acceleration. The story I have is, how many of you know about Moderna, this startup, which was a startup in US, the first company in the world to actually release a COVID vaccine. This is a small startup in Massachusetts, Boston, which most people hadn't even heard of. Amazing, amazing leadership team. But 42 days after the Chinese government gives you the DNA sequence, this company has an active vaccine developed, ready for deployment. 42 days, trust me. And when you go back and peel the onion as to how could they accelerate and innovate so fast, what they did was essentially take the elements of AI and make it so platform and so across the board that every employee would look for unit improvement in his part. So they had AI being used in design. They had a very unique messenger RNA approach to building vaccines. So starting from concept, the architecture, to manufacturing, they had completely automated that process. And this was a classic case of someone who can accelerate so fast, because you had Pfizer's and other big guys come and give you vaccines, but Moderna had a first-time advantage. And the heart of the story was being able to accelerate. So make sure that as you design your organizations, the acceleration elements are in place. Very often, we tend to become overtly cynical or overtly optimistic, and that balance is hard to find, but you've got to keep checking on that mix so that you accelerate ideas to finish as quickly as possible, largely using technology. The fourth principle is extend. I give you the example of not invented here. So clearly, not all ideas have to be done in-house. Some are, not all. And what I found is I'm finding so many new ways of external collaboration. Crowdsourcing, right? We have this more and more service companies that are saying, listen, I don't have all the solutions. And some of these ideas can be very successfully crowdsourced. Again, it sounds easier than getting it done. But that itself is an innovative approach to making sure that in this new economy, gig economy, where we have people in different parts of the world, I just go and float a problem statement, and I have a lot of smart people jump at it. And if it meets my criteria of selection, and I just go ahead and start scaling and integrating it. So won't apply in all businesses, won't apply in all sectors, but clearly either through a startup venture mechanism or through crowdsourcing. Always remember, right, the first iPod that Steve Jobs brought to market was a completely outsourced product. In fact, almost every part of iPod was outsourced, which meant that from concept to release, it was a 9-month journey. So don't get completely caught up in the idea of doing stuff in-house. True for startups, true for big companies. Let's reach out and embrace all the great ideas wherever they are and make something out of it. Last but not the least, when I talk about the ingredients for successful innovation and commercialization, the mobilization of resource and people is so important. When you think of an innovation strategy, it's got broadly, you think of it as 3 boxes. There's clearly the strategic intent. Most people get that part right. You're solving an unmet need or a customer problem statement or something better than what your competition is doing. That part, very rarely people get wrong. Where people struggle, most likely, are in the execution part, where I call it an element of hardware and software, right? The hardware is your organization design. The software is the culture. And those are not very prescriptive. And if you don't have the right culture, the greatest of ideas don't get to the final outcome. And the third box that we often talk about in mobilization is, am I actually solving for performance, or am I solving for something else, right? Is it an opportunity gap or a performance gap? Performance gaps tend to be incremental. Like, my competition does it at X level, I'm doing it at 2X levels. That's kind of a performance innovation gap. But the opportunity gap is Amazon moving from a e-commerce player to becoming AWS player, right? Who would have thought a company like Amazon, that is not traditionally an enterprise supplier or vendor, beating the likes of Google and Microsoft for a fairly long time? So those are my simple, hopefully useful nuggets for how to frame the problem statement in your organizations. I wish you all a good luck in your journeys of innovation and commercialization, or open to answer any questions or comments that you may have. Good being here. Thank you for your time.